Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Number 7. The Great Flood of Gun-Yu. Ancient Chinese historical texts claim civilization began in 2000 BC, when Emperor Yu founded the Xia dynasty. Right before this happened, there was a mighty flood. The Yellow River broke and the territories of Emperor Yao were devastated. Crops were destroyed by the flood and entire villages were washed away. People fled desperately to escape the deadly waters, seeking shelter on mountaintops and in caves. But unfortunately, the flooding went on for 9 long years. During those 9 years, the emperor was helpless to stop the endless floods from destroying his people. He appointed the young Prince Gun to deal with the issue, but when he didn't make any headway, Gun was killed and replaced by his own son, Yu. Legend has it that instead of trying to contain the flood, Yu brilliantly diverted it. He ordered new channels to be dredged so that the floodwaters would slowly drain away. It took him 13 years to redirect the floodwaters, but once he was done, he'd transformed a flooded China into a bountiful region with rich, watery soil. And when he became emperor, Chinese civilization began. It's unclear how much of this story is true. However, archaeologists have verified that based on sediments along the Yellow River, a flood did occur around 1900 BC. It may have also been just as bad as the legends say it was. Researchers think the catastrophe was one of the biggest freshwater floods of the past 10,000 years. It was likely caused by an earthquake that triggered a landslide which blocked the upper section of the river. It created a natural dam with water building up behind it for about a year. Then, when the natural dam finally burst, it resulted in catastrophic floods. And as a result, the lower plains were inundated with water for 22 years. There are no records for how many people died or how ravaged the civilization was, but legend does suggest that all those living along the Yellow River suffered from disease, famine, and displacement. And now for number 6. But first, it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Nicola Brown and Caleri for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries, or dinosaurs, or ancient civilizations. We've got it all. Number 6. The Tartessos. Starting around 2,500 years ago, a powerful civilization appeared in southwestern Spain. They were so sophisticated and technologically advanced that they rivaled the Greeks on the other side of Europe. This civilization was called Tartessos, and the people living there were fantastic shipbuilders and excelled in metalwork. They also have some tenuous links to the civilization of Atlantis. However, Tartessos suddenly vanished without a trace, and nobody knows what happened to it. Some think the civilization was washed into the sea by a flood. The exact meaning of the word Tartessos is unknown and speculative. Biblical scholars believe the city's real name was Tarshish, which was mentioned in the book of Ezekiel and the book of Kings. It was said to be a powerful city that produced gold and silver and sold its wares to King Solomon. But other ancient sources called Tartessos a city, not a civilization. Greek geographer Strabo said it was a city in Iberia with a rich culture of literature. Ancient historian Herodotus said it was a fully blown kingdom ruled by a wise king named Arganthonios. Herodotus also described Tartessos as being located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, or the Strait of Gibraltar as it's otherwise known. Oddly enough, that's the exact same place that Plato claimed Atlantis was located before it was destroyed by a flood. The truth of Tartessos remains elusive to this day, but there is still plenty of archaeological evidence to give scholars a good idea of who they were and what happened to them. Historians have found artifacts and ruins in the Tartessos region of Spain that date back to about 1200 BC. The civilization certainly existed. They were heavily influenced by the Phoenicians, even using the Phoenician alphabet. But some have suggested it wasn't a civilization at all, but merely an outpost of the Phoenicians. There are over 20 sites associated with Tartessos in Spain, everything from cities to places of animal sacrifice. But there has never been any trace found of military power. With the Carthaginians being so active in the region starting around the 5th century BC, they may have destroyed the defenseless Tartessos society. However, others think it had more to do with a natural disaster, a flood that pushed Tartessos into the sea, just like Atlantis. Number 5. Cahokia. Did a megaflood destroy the ancient American city of Cahokia? One of the biggest cities the ancient world ever saw came into being on the edge of the Mississippi River in modern-day St. Louis 1,000 years ago. It was called Cahokia, and it was potentially the greatest Native American city ever constructed. But 300 years after it was founded, the city was gone. And new research has shown Cahokia may have flooded thanks to a disaster on the Mississippi River around the year 1200. The abrupt disappearance of Cahokia has remained one of the biggest mysteries in American archaeology for years. It's just as baffling as the Anasazi of the Southwest, who disappeared abruptly around the same time. But now, students from the University of Wisconsin believe they have the answers. A team led by Samuel E. Munoz studied sediment cores from Horseshoe Lake, right beside the site of Cahokia, and the sediment revealed proof of biblical-level flooding just as the city was reaching its peak of power. But how do sediment cores reveal evidence of ancient floods? The team looked at the various layers of silt and clay deposited at the bottom of the lake. Horseshoe Lake separated from the Mississippi River about 1,700 years ago, and its layers of sediment act like the rings in a tree, giving snapshots of what happened year by year. For example, looking at pollen deposits in the sediment revealed a sudden boom in farming starting about 450 AD. The farming was followed by a rapid period of deforestation, and this correlates directly to humans settling in the area and starting agriculture. The deposits also showed that corn cultivation reached its height between the years 900 and 1200. Then, by 1350, all agricultural activity had ceased. The next layer is the most shocking. The team discovered a 9.5-inch thick deposit of silty clay that was left behind by a sudden flood. When a flood of that magnitude takes place, it's evident because it leaves its mark by churning up all the soil. And judging by the size of the deposit, the floodwaters were huge. Researchers think the flood surge was over 10 stories tall, big enough to utterly destroy Cahokia. It's likely that the water destroyed all the crops, making it impossible for a large population to sustain themselves in a city, and this caused a mass exodus, forcing the Native Americans out of Cahokia. Number 4. The Black Sea Deluge. The Black Sea Deluge hypothesis was proposed by scientist William Ryan and his colleagues in 1997. The hypothesis says that the Black Sea was created by a catastrophic flood which pushed water from the Mediterranean Sea inland to grow the Black Sea. William Ryan suggested the Great Flood took place about 7,600 years ago. Many supporters of the theory think this hypothetical event could have been the basis for the global flood myth found in the Bible. The idea is that prior to 5600 BC, the Black Sea was a vast freshwater lake fed by glacial meltwater because of the end of the Ice Age. But as the glaciers from the Ice Age dwindled, the rivers started to go dry. Some of them shifted course and started draining into the North Sea or into the Mediterranean. And at some point, the Mediterranean burst. An estimated 10 cubic miles of water poured through a channel and into the Black Sea. To understand how much water that is, it equals about 200 times more than the flow of Niagara Falls. It was a catastrophic flood that resulted in the creation of the Black Sea, which before had only been a small lake. But after the flood, it turned into an actual sea, just like the Mediterranean. The deluge not only created a sea, but it also devastated the surrounding area. Imagine all that water flooding a vast chunk of the ancient world. This was a place where early humans were living in primitive villages and sleeping in caves. Civilization was on the cusp of starting. But this flood would have been absolutely horrific for everyone living in the area. It would have washed away entire early civilizations into the bottom of the Black Sea, and those who survived the destruction may have thought the whole world was flooded, hence the creation of the biblical flood myth. The theory picked up steam in the late 1990s and even headlined in the New York Times. This prompted a team of marine archaeologists to dive into the Black Sea in search of evidence of destroyed civilizations. And they found what looked like an ancient shoreline dotted by human construction. They uncovered timber buildings at about 330 feet deep that had likely stood at the edge of the Black Sea when it was only a small lake. But sadly, when that floodwater came, the people had nowhere to go. How many civilizations do you think were wiped out by this ancient flood? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. Number 3. Flooding in the Sahara. The Sahara Desert is the biggest desert on the planet, smaller only than the cool deserts of Antarctica and the Arctic. It covers 8 different modern countries, including Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. It's a hot and inhospitable wasteland, but it may have once been covered in water. Scientists know that it was covered in water during the dinosaur age, but there may have been a much more catastrophic levels that changed the landscape forever. Let's start with what scientists know for sure. 11,000 years ago, the Sahara Desert was unrecognizable. It was a fertile place of lakes, rivers, and forests. And archaeologist David Wright believes the transition from beautiful wet forests to dry hellscape happened because of humans and goats. David's theory is that when humans brought their domesticated animals to the desert 8,000 years ago, their goats ate up all the grass. This reduced the amount of atmospheric moisture, which means there were less clouds. The lack of moisture triggered a sudden change in climate that stopped the rain from falling, and within 4,000 years, the Sahara dried up almost completely. Going back even further, it's possible that the reason the Sahara was so lush 11,000 years ago was that it flooded 1,000 years earlier. Around 14,000 BC, floodwaters may have poured over the Sahara and destroyed a mysterious civilization living there. And conspiracy theorists have put forth a lot of potential evidence for a Saharan flood. One piece of potential evidence is the Sahara ripples. These are ripples seen from satellite images across huge sections of the desert. They look like marks left by powerful waters sweeping across the sand. But mainstream scientists say those are nothing but ordinary sand dunes. But then there's the Eye of the Sahara, a geological structure that some have proposed is, in fact, the ruins of the city of Atlantis. The theory is that 12,000 years ago, a brief but powerful flood swept across the Sahara, completely destroying Atlantis. The flood left nothing behind except the scars on the desert where the city once stood. But according to mainstream scientists, that idea is nothing but a fantasy. They say the Eye of the Sahara is a natural volcanic dome. Still, though, their claims haven't stopped others from creating their own explanations for the bizarre geological structure. Number 2. The London Beer Flood. The London Beer Flood didn't destroy any civilizations, but it did kill at least 8 people. On October 17, 1814, a horrible disaster unfolded in the city of London. An industrial accident unleashed a flood of beer onto the streets around Tottenham Court Road, causing widespread destruction. It wasn't just a little bit of beer either. It was a very real tsunami that washed people away. The accident revolved around the Horseshoe Brewery, which stood at the edge of Tottenham Court Road and Great Russell Street. In 1810, the brewery installed a massive wooden fermentation tank with 22-foot walls. The tank was held together using massive iron rings, and the vat within was capable of containing about 3,500 barrels of porter ale. Then, during the afternoon hours on the day in question, one of the iron rings broke, and roughly an hour later, the whole tank ruptured. Hot fermenting ale was unleashed from the tank with such incredible force that the back wall of the brewery was shattered. The force of the blast ripped apart other storage tanks, setting free about 320,000 gallons of beer. The single tank blew apart and caused a chain reaction, and all that beer was released down the street like floodwaters flowing through a narrow canyon. This particular part of London was known as St. Giles Rookery. It was densely populated, an old London slum full of cheap lodgings and homeless people. And this was where the poor, the destitute, and the criminal resided. Most of the time, they would have been happy to have some free beer, but in this case, it came to them in a wave that was about 15 feet tall. The flood decimated the neighborhood. Basements of houses were flooded, and entire apartments collapsed. 2 of the victims were Mary Banfield and her daughter Hannah. They were sitting down for some afternoon tea when they suddenly found themselves drowning in beer. In the basement of another house, there was a wake happening for a young Irish boy who'd perished the day before. 4 of the people who showed up for the wake drowned in brown porter ale. Amidst the devastation, there were those who couldn't resist a free drink. People supposedly ran into the streets with mugs trying to scoop up as much free beer as they could, and they did this while people's bodies floated in the foam. An unsubstantiated report claimed that the 9th victim came the day after the flood, when they died from alcohol poisoning. Number 1. Petra washed away. The ancient city of Petra was the capital of the mighty desert people known as the Nabateans. They accumulated incredible wealth by trading with their neighbors in Europe, mainly the Greeks and the Romans. And their city of Petra soon became an economic hub for the world. It was a mighty trading post with its own unique culture and a healthy political landscape. But in 312 BC, the Greeks sacked the city. The Nabateans survived, but not for very long. In 106 AD, the city was attacked again, but this time by the Romans. They did even more damage than the Greeks had. They annexed the entire territory and renamed the area Arabia Petraea. And unfortunately, the Roman occupation was the beginning of the end for Nabatean culture. Following the conquering of Petra by Rome, the city thrived for another 250 years. Then, in the middle of the 4th century, people began to leave. Researchers think there was a devastating earthquake that caused an exodus from the city, and soon after, the whole place was abandoned. It's always been a bit of a mystery why a simple earthquake would cause such a powerful capital to be forsaken. But scientists are now thinking that Petra may have been devastated by a flash flood. In 2017, archaeologists discovered beds of white sandstone along the edges of Petra. It was really strange because the valley doesn't contain any white sandstone. It's only found a fair distance away at the top of a hill. Researchers think the white sandstone was carried from the hill down into Petra when it flooded. Now, the hypothesis is that Petra wasn't abandoned because of a little earthquake. A devastating flash flood sent water spilling into the city, potentially drowning thousands of people. Researchers have estimated the floodwaters filled the valleys and canyons of Petra, leaving the people with no route of escape. Thanks for watching. Do you think a flood could destroy our civilization in the near future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!